Emily and Jake's relationship began with a spark 5 years ago, filled with the excitement of fresh love. Jake, at the time, was the epitome of charisma, athletic, charming, and engaging despite his modest job as a manager at Walmart. Emily found herself captivated by his lively personality and the confidence he exuded, even in mundane circumstances. His warm laugh and the way he could light up any room were traits Emily couldn't resist. Their first year together was a whirlwind of dates, shared dreams, and promises of building a life together. Jake's consistent optimism about the future and his affectionate nature won Emily over. Despite his limited career prospects, she saw potential in him and believed his energy would translate into eventual growth and ambition. They married after a brief but intense courtship, and Emily was certain she had found her partner for life. However, over the years, Jake began to change, or, as Emily would later reflect, perhaps she had only now started to see him clearly. Life's challenges, the grind of routine, and the absence of tangible progress in his career started to weigh on their relationship. Jake remained a manager at Walmart, seemingly content with his role. The job, once a stepping stone in her eyes, now appeared to be his final destination. Emily's enthusiasm turned into mild concern, and then to quiet disappointment as the years went by. Jake's physical transformation mirrored his stagnation in other areas of life. He gradually gained weight, losing the athletic physique that Emily had once admired. Nights out turned into nights on the couch, with Jake preferring television and takeout over the active lifestyle they once enjoyed together. His wardrobe of sharp, casual clothes gave way to ill-fitting t-shirts and sweatpants. It wasn't just his appearance that changed, his energy and drive seemed to dim. To Emily, it felt as though Jake had let himself go, both physically and emotionally. Conversations about aspirations and the future dwindled. Whenever she broached the topic of trying something new, whether a fitness routine, a career move, or even a simple weekend getaway, Jake would dismiss her with excuses or brush off the suggestion with a self-deprecating joke. It wasn't laziness exactly, it was more a profound comfort with mediocrity that gnawed at Emily's perception of him. For Jake, these changes were likely rooted in a combination of comfort and denial. He loved Emily deeply, but as the years passed, he grew complacent in their relationship. He didn't notice, or chose to ignore, Emily's growing dissatisfaction. In his mind, their marriage was a stable partnership, free of the struggles many other couples faced. What he saw as stability, Emily perceived as stagnation. As Jake settled deeper into this routine, Emily found herself growing increasingly resentful. She hated that she was the only one still striving for more, for better. While she had taken on new challenges at work, advanced her skills, and even joined a local yoga class to stay fit, Jake seemed content to coast. The disparity between their trajectories became harder for her to ignore. Social occasions became a source of tension. Emily would meticulously plan her outfits, eager to make a good impression, while Jake would put in minimal effort, showing up in wrinkled clothes and with little interest in the events. Friends began to notice the shift. Comments about how laid-back Jake had become felt more like subtle criticisms than compliments to Emily's ears. She started to dread the inevitable questions about when Jake would move up in his career or take on new responsibilities. The excuses she once offered on his behalf now felt hollow. The weight of her disappointment was compounded by Jake's obliviousness. When she brought up her feelings, Jake would laugh them off or tell her she was overthinking things. He didn't understand why she felt humiliated by his lack of ambition or why she cared so much about his appearance. To him, their relationship was solid, and these concerns were superficial. Emily, however, saw them as symptoms of a deeper issue, a lack of effort, a disregard for her desires, and, perhaps most painfully, a growing emotional distance. As the chasm between them widened, Emily began to question herself. Was she being unreasonable or shallow? Was it fair to expect Jake to change when he seemed perfectly happy with their life as it was? These questions plagued her, but they couldn't shake the gnawing dissatisfaction she felt. She longed for the man she had married, the vibrant, driven partner who had once inspired her. Instead, she felt increasingly like she was carrying their marriage alone, dragging along a partner who seemed uninterested in meeting her halfway. The tension came to a head during a casual dinner with friends. One of Emily's colleagues casually mentioned a promotion she had received, leading to a discussion about career ambitions. When the topic turned to Jake, he chuckled and said, "I'm just happy where I am." The words were meant to be lighthearted, but to Emily, they felt like a slap in the face. She couldn't help but notice the uncomfortable silence that followed or the subtle glances exchanged around the table. That night, on the drive home, Emily's simmering frustration boiled over, leading to a tense argument that left them both emotionally drained. Jake's response to the confrontation was a mix of hurt and confusion. He couldn't understand why his contentment was such a problem for Emily. He loved her, provided for her, and believed they had a good life together. Emily, on the other hand, felt unseen and unheard, her desires dismissed in favor of maintaining the status quo. Their marriage, once a partnership filled with promise, now felt like a battleground of unmet expectations and unspoken resentments. Emily couldn't help but wonder if Jake's complacency was a reflection of his true self, a man who was happy with less, even if it meant losing her in the process. Emily's frustration with Jake had grown into a constant undercurrent in her life, a shadow that darkened even her brightest moments. Over the years, her career as a corporate consultant had flourished, earning her respect and admiration in her field. She was known for her sharp mind, impeccable presentation, and ability to close deals that others couldn't. Emily valued her image intensely. It wasn't just vanity, it was a cornerstone of her professional success. Her appearance, her demeanor, and even the subtle nuances of her personal life all played a role in how she was perceived. And Jake had become the glaring flaw in the otherwise polished picture she presented to the world. Initially, she tried to compartmentalize, keeping her professional life separate from her home life. But Jake's disheveled appearance and complacent attitude began bleeding into her work in subtle, insidious ways. The first time she felt it was during a networking event where she had brought Jake along, hoping to introduce him to some of her colleagues and potential clients. While Emily wore a tailored dress and carried herself with confidence, Jake arrived in a wrinkled button-up shirt that barely fit, his posture slouched and his demeanor casual to the point of indifference. Throughout the evening, Jake hovered awkwardly, making small talk but failing to engage meaningfully with anyone. When a senior client, a man Emily had spent months cultivating a relationship with, asked Jake about his career, Jake casually mentioned his Walmart manager job. He even joked about how it was stress-free compared to Emily's fancy corporate stuff. The client's polite smile and subtle glance at Emily spoke volumes, a moment of quiet judgment that felt like a dagger. On the way home that night, Emily seethed silently, her disappointment palpable but unspoken. It wasn't just Jake's appearance or job, it was the way he carried himself, the lack of ambition that seemed to define him. Emily began to feel like she was dragging a dead weight through life. While she pushed herself to achieve more, Jake seemed content to stay exactly where he was. The man she had once admired for his charm and humor now felt like a liability, a constant reminder of what she perceived as mediocrity. Her resentment deepened during her company's annual gala, a high-profile event attended by clients, executives, and industry leaders. Emily had spent weeks preparing, ensuring every detail of her outfit and presentation was perfect. She had even briefed Jake on the importance of the evening, hoping he would rise to the occasion. But when he arrived to pick her up, she was horrified. He wore a suit that looked like it hadn't been tailored since college, paired with scuffed shoes and a tie that didn't match. His unkempt beard and slightly disheveled hair only added to the overall impression of someone who didn't care. At the gala, Emily felt like every conversation was tinged with unspoken criticism. A client's spouse asked Jake what he did for a living, and his answer, delivered with a self-deprecating laugh, was met with polite disinterest. Emily couldn't help but notice how other couples seemed to complement each other, their partners exuding the same polished professionalism she prided herself on. Jake, meanwhile, stood out for all the wrong reasons. The humiliation didn't end there. During the event, Emily overheard a colleague whispering about Jake to another attendee. "Is that her husband?" the woman asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. "I mean, I guess opposites attract, but, wow." Emily's face burned with shame, but she forced herself to smile and pretend she hadn't heard. Later, When Jake tried to lighten the mood with an offhand joke about the event being a bit too fancy for his taste, Emily snapped. "Do you even understand how important this is for me?" she hissed under her breath, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Jake looked taken aback, muttering something about how he thought he was doing fine. The rest of the evening was tense, and by the time they got home, Emily couldn't hold back her feelings any longer. "I can't do this anymore, Jake," she said, her voice breaking. "You embarrass me. Do you even realize how hard I've worked to get where I am? And then you show up looking like that, acting like this is some kind of joke? People notice, Jake. They notice, and they judge me because of you." Jake's face fell, the hurt evident in his eyes. "I didn't realize it mattered so much to you," he said quietly. "I thought you loved me for who I am." "I thought I did too," Emily shot back. "But you don't even try anymore. You've let yourself go completely. Your job, your appearance, your attitude, it's like you've just given up. And I'm the one who has to suffer for it." The argument escalated, with Jake defending his choices and accusing Emily of being shallow and ungrateful. "I've supported you through everything, Emily," he said, his voice rising. "I've been here every step of the way. And now you're throwing it in my face because I don't fit into your perfect little corporate world." Emily's response was cutting. "Support? Is that what you call it? Sitting on the couch every night, doing the bare minimum, while I work my ass off. You're not supporting me, Jake. You're holding me back." The words hung in the air like a slap, and Jake didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Emily alone with her anger and the echo of her harsh words. In the days that followed, Emily found herself increasingly avoiding Jake. She stayed late at the office, threw herself into work, and even began attending events alone, claiming Jake was too busy to join her. But the truth was, she couldn't bear the thought of him being there, a visible reminder of everything she felt was wrong in her life. Her frustration reached a boiling point during a client dinner where Jake had promised to make an effort. Instead, he arrived late, looking harried and apologizing profusely for losing track of time. The clients were gracious, but Emily could feel their pitying glances. When Jake attempted to contribute to the conversation, his remarks were clumsy and off-topic, further cementing Emily's sense of humiliation. That night, after the clients left, Emily couldn't contain her fury. "Do you even care about how this affects me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to be taken seriously when I'm married to someone who acts like they don't care about anything?" Jake's response was defeated. "I do care, Emily. But I can't seem to do anything right in your eyes. Maybe because you're not trying hard enough," she snapped, the words cutting deeper than she intended. In the silence that followed, Emily realized just how far they had drifted from the couple they once were. The man she had fallen in love with was still there, somewhere, but he had been buried under years of complacency and unmet expectations. And she wasn't sure if she had the strength, or the desire, to find him again. The neighborhood party was supposed to be a casual, relaxing evening, a chance for Emily to unwind after a grueling week at work. Their neighbors, the Watsons, had gone all out with the setup, fairy lights strung across the backyard, a catering service offering endless hors d'oeuvres, and a live band playing soft tunes to set the mood. It was the kind of event Emily usually enjoyed, a break from the corporate grind where she could network subtly while maintaining the appearance of a friendly, approachable neighbor. But tonight, Emily wasn't in the mood for appearances. She had had another exhausting day, one marked by a tense meeting with her boss and a last-minute deal that had fallen apart. To make matters worse, Jake had shown up to the party looking exactly as he always did, wearing a poorly fitting polo shirt that strained around his middle, paired with jeans that had clearly seen better days. His casual demeanor, his comfortable small talk with the other guests, it all grated on her nerves in a way she couldn't quite explain. At first, Emily tried to focus on the positives. She mingled, sipped her wine, and laughed at the polite jokes of their hosts. But as the evening wore on, her frustration with Jake began to bubble to the surface. She couldn't ignore the way some of her neighbors glanced at him, subtle but unmistakable. They exchanged fleeting looks that Emily interpreted as judgmental, and each one felt like a tiny dagger to her pride. By her third glass of wine, her simmering resentment had turned into a roaring boil. Jake, oblivious to her growing agitation, was chatting with Mr. Green about fishing trips, a hobby Jake had always talked about but never pursued. The casual tone of the conversation, the way Jake chuckled as if he didn't have a care in the world, only made Emily angrier. Here she was, carrying the weight of their lives, working late, maintaining their home, striving to be perfect, and Jake was coasting. Coasting and smiling, as if he couldn't see how much of a disappointment he had become. Emily didn't mean to start the argument. It was a fleeting thought that escaped her lips before she could stop it, but the alcohol loosened her inhibitions, and she couldn't hold it in. As Jake made a self-deprecating joke about his cooking skills, Emily muttered loud enough for the people around her to hear, "Well, you're certainly good at eating." The group went silent. Jake turned to her, his smile faltering as he tried to gauge if she was joking. Emily didn't let up. Fueled by her embarrassment and simmering anger, she continued, her voice sharp and biting. "Honestly, Jake, look at yourself," she said, gesturing at his stomach. "You've completely let yourself go. Do you even care how embarrassing this is for me?" "Emily," Jake said softly, his face reddening as he glanced at the onlookers. "Maybe we should talk about this later." "Why later?" she shot back, the wine giving her courage she didn't need. "You never listen anyway. You're too busy sitting on the couch or shoveling food in your mouth." Jake's shoulders stiffened, and the murmurs around them grew louder. Some neighbors awkwardly pretended not to hear, but others leaned in, eager to catch every word. It was a train wreck unfolding in real time, and Emily couldn't stop herself. "You know what you are?" she slurred, the words spilling out like venom. "You're fat. You're disgusting. And you're dragging me down with you." Jake's face was pale now, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and humiliation. "Emily, please," he murmured, but it was too late. The damage was done. Unbeknownst to Emily, one of the neighbors, Sarah, a woman with a reputation for loving drama, had been recording the argument on her phone. As Emily continued her tirade, Sarah discreetly captured the entire scene, from Emily's pointed insults to Jake's desperate attempts to calm her down. By the time Emily stormed off to the bar for another drink, Sarah had already uploaded the video to her social media with the caption, "Neighborhood drama at its finest." Within hours, the video began to spread. What started as a neighborhood scandal quickly grew into something much larger. The clip was shared, reposted, and commented on by strangers who didn't know Emily or Jake but had plenty of opinions about their marriage. Comments ranged from outrage at Emily's cruelty to sympathy for Jake, who was painted as the helpless victim of a toxic spouse. When Emily woke up the next morning, groggy and nursing a splitting headache, she had no idea what had transpired. It wasn't until Jake confronted her, his face ashen, his phone clutched tightly in his hand, that she realized the extent of the damage. "Did you see this?" he asked, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. He held up his phone, the screen displaying the now viral video. Emily stared at it, her stomach sinking as she watched herself berate Jake in front of their neighbors. The memory of the night before came rushing back, each detail sharper and more humiliating than the last. "Jake," she began, but he cut her off. "Do you have any idea how this feels?" he said, his voice rising. "To have my wife, the woman who's supposed to love me, call me fat and disgusting in front of the entire neighborhood? And now the whole world gets to watch it on repeat." Emily tried to apologize, but her words felt hollow, even to her. "I didn't mean it," she said weakly. "I was drunk and I—" "And what?" Jake snapped, his voice trembling. "And you finally said what you've been thinking all along? That I'm not good enough for you? That I embarrass you?" The argument that followed was the worst they had ever had. Emily tried to defend herself, to explain that she had been under pressure and hadn't meant to humiliate him. But Jake wasn't interested in her excuses. For the first time, he stood his ground, his voice filled with a quiet anger that Emily hadn't heard before. "You've been tearing me down for years, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "And I've let you because I thought that's what love was, supporting you, even when you made me feel like nothing. But this is too much." The fallout from the video was swift and brutal. Emily's colleagues and clients saw it, and while no one said anything directly, she could feel the judgment in their eyes. Jake, meanwhile, became the unwitting center of attention, with strangers reaching out to offer him support and sympathy. Some even encouraged him to leave Emily, insisting he deserved better. As the days went on, the tension between them became unbearable. Jake avoided Emily whenever possible, spending long hours at work or out of the house. Emily, for her part, was consumed by guilt and shame, but she didn't know how to fix what she had broken. Their marriage, already strained, was now on the brink of collapse. And for the first time, Emily realized that she might not be able to salvage it, not because of Jake's faults, but because of her own. The aftermath of the neighborhood party scandal hit Emily like a storm she hadn't seen coming. In the days following the video's release, it seemed her entire world began to crumble, piece by piece. It wasn't just the immediate humiliation of seeing her drunken rant immortalized online, it was the fallout that seeped into every corner of her life. Emily's professional reputation, which she had spent years carefully cultivating, took the first and hardest blow. Clients began canceling meetings, often under vague pretenses, but their reasons were obvious. One longtime client, a woman Emily had considered a friend, was more direct. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said over the phone, her voice laced with discomfort. "I just don't think this is the right fit for us anymore." It's not personal, but it was personal. It was painfully, excruciatingly personal. Her colleagues weren't much better. While no one addressed the video outright, the whispers followed her everywhere. Meetings became a gauntlet of sidelong glances and awkward silences. The respect she had commanded in the office had evaporated, replaced by an air of thinly veiled pity, or worse, judgment. Emily overheard snippets of conversations in the break room, her name spoken in hushed tones. "I can't believe she'd say those things," one coworker murmured. "Especially about her own husband. Did you see his face in the video? He looked destroyed." "I know," another voice chimed in. "You'd think someone like Emily, so polished and professional, would know better. Guess not." The humiliation didn't end there. Friends she had once trusted began to distance themselves. Invitations to brunches and weekend outings dried up, replaced by awkward excuses and last-minute cancellations. Emily knew they had seen the video. It was impossible not to in their circle. She couldn't blame them for pulling away. Who wanted to associate with someone whose personal failures were trending online? But the most devastating consequence was Jake's departure. He had spent the first few days after the party in a haze of quiet fury, barely speaking to Emily and avoiding her at every opportunity. When he finally confronted her, his words were calm but unyielding. "I can't stay here anymore," he said, standing in the doorway of their bedroom with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I don't even know who you are, Emily. I've tried to be patient, to be understanding, but this was too much." "Jake, please," Emily said, her voice trembling. She reached out to touch his arm, but he stepped back, his expression hardening. "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to ask me for anything right now. Not after what you did. Not after you made me feel like nothing in front of everyone." His words cut deeper than she expected, and tears filled her eyes. But Jake didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked out of the house, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in the silence. The next day, Emily received the papers. Jake had filed for divorce. The sight of his name on the official documents made it all feel horrifyingly real. She stared at the page, the words blurring together as waves of guilt and despair crashed over her. Jake's departure didn't go unnoticed in their neighborhood. In fact, it seemed to spark a wave of support for him. Neighbors who had once been friendly to both of them began rallying around Jake, offering their sympathy and encouragement. He was invited to barbecues and dinners, treated like a hero who had finally escaped a toxic situation. Emily, meanwhile, became the subject of quiet disdain. When she walked down the street, she could feel the eyes of her neighbors following her, their gazes filled with judgment. Conversations would abruptly stop as she approached, replaced by polite but strained greetings. The betrayal Emily felt from these small interactions was compounded when she discovered that some of her closest allies had turned against her. Sarah, the neighbor who had filmed the original video, became a key figure in the scandal, giving interviews about how she had captured the moment. "I just thought people deserved to know," Sarah said in one clip, her tone feigning concern. It's not about gossip, it's about accountability. Emily's rage towards Sarah burned hot, but it was nothing compared to the shame she felt watching Jake receive an outpouring of public support. Online forums and comment sections filled with messages of encouragement for him. Strangers praised him for leaving her, for standing up for himself after years of what they assumed was quiet suffering. "You deserve so much better, Jake," one commenter wrote. "Stay strong. You're an inspiration." Emily couldn't bring herself to look at the comments about her. The few she had seen were brutal, painting her as a cold-hearted villain who had emotionally destroyed her husband for no reason other than her own insecurities. Some users even speculated about her career, suggesting she must have clawed her way to the top by stepping on others, just as she had stepped on Jake. Her isolation grew. Every attempt she made to reach out to Jake was met with silence. She left voicemails, sent texts, even tried writing a heartfelt email apologizing for everything she had said and done. But Jake never responded. Instead, she saw glimpses of his new life through social media. Photos of him laughing with neighbors, posts about his newfound focus on self-care and personal growth. He had started attending fitness classes at the local gym, shedding the weight that had been a point of contention between them. The irony wasn't lost on Emily. Jake was becoming the man she had once hoped he would be, but now it was too late. As weeks turned into months, Emily's life continued to spiral. She lost several high-profile clients, who cited public image concerns as their reason for ending their contracts. Her savings dwindled as she struggled to maintain her lifestyle, and she found herself questioning everything she had once valued. In her darkest moments, Emily couldn't help but replay the events of the party in her mind. She saw Jake's face as she hurled those cruel words at him, the way his shoulders had slumped under the weight of her insults. She heard her own voice, sharp and cutting, filled with a venom she hadn't even realized she was capable of. And she saw the fallout, the neighbors turning away, the clients disappearing, Jake walking out the door without looking back. For the first time, Emily was forced to confront the reality of who she had become. The ambitious, polished woman who had once taken pride in her success was now a pariah, a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition turns to arrogance and love gives way to contempt. The scandal had stripped away everything she thought she knew about herself, leaving her raw and exposed. And as much as she hated to admit it, Emily knew that she had no one to blame but herself. In the months following the breakup, Jake transformed in ways Emily hadn't anticipated, and the sharp contrast between his new life and her crumbling one became a constant source of bitterness. For years, she had begged, nagged, and berated him, hoping he would change. Now, in the aftermath of their disastrous split, Jake was finally doing everything she had wanted, only without her. Jake's physical transformation was the most immediate and obvious change. Within weeks of leaving their home, he joined a local gym, guided by neighbors who had encouraged him to take better care of himself. At first, Emily dismissed it as a passing phase, convinced he would lose interest. But as photos of a fitter, healthier Jake began to circulate on social media, it became clear this was no fleeting effort. His once slouched posture was replaced with confidence, and the weight he'd carried for years seemed to melt away. Emily couldn't believe it. This was the same man who had spent years glued to the couch, brushing off her suggestions of working out together or trying a healthier diet. Now he was not only shedding pounds but was also sharing motivational posts online, thanking his new community for their support. In one post he wrote, "Sometimes, it takes hitting rock bottom to realize you need to climb out of the hole you've been living in. Thank you to everyone who's been there for me. Your kindness means the world." The caption infuriated Emily. Rock bottom? Climbing out? As if their life together had been the pit he needed to escape. She found herself staring at his pictures, resentful of how much better he looked. He had traded his old, oversized clothes for sleek, tailored outfits that fit his new physique. He looked like the man she had always wanted him to be, but now he was a stranger, and worse, he seemed happy. Jake's career followed the same upward trajectory as his appearance. Emily learned through mutual acquaintances that Jake had been promoted to assistant store manager, a role that came with a significant pay raise and more responsibilities. While it wasn't the glamorous career she had once dreamed of for him, it was still progress, progress he had stubbornly refused to make while they were together. One evening, as she scrolled through her dwindling contacts, Emily saw a post from one of Jake's coworkers. It was a picture of Jake standing in front of a team, leading a meeting, his expression confident and authoritative. The caption read, "Proud of my buddy Jake for stepping up and becoming a true leader at work. Keep killing it, man." The comments were filled with congratulations and praise, and Emily felt her stomach twist. This was the same man she had begged to show ambition, to take pride in his work. Now he was finally stepping up, but only after she was out of the picture. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. But the final blow came when she discovered Jake was dating someone new. The first hint came through a photo shared by one of their neighbors, a candid shot of Jake at a barbecue, his arm casually draped around a woman Emily didn't recognize. She was younger, slim, with a bright smile and an air of effortless charm. They looked comfortable together, laughing as if they had known each other forever. Emily's pulse quickened as she searched for more information. She scoured social media, piecing together what she could about the new woman, who seemed to be a yoga instructor with a penchant for outdoor adventures, everything Emily was not. The photos that began to surface were almost unbearable. Jake and the woman, whose name was Laura, hiking together. Jake and Laura at a farmer's market. Jake and Laura smiling, looking blissful and carefree, as if the weight of his past life had been lifted from his shoulders. Emily couldn't stop herself from spiraling into a loop of bitterness and resentment. She replayed every argument, every insult, and every plea she had made during their marriage. How could he change so drastically for someone else when he had refused to change for her? It wasn't fair. She had been the one to push him, to call him out on his flaws, to demand more. And now another woman was reaping the rewards of her effort, enjoying the version of Jake that Emily had tried so hard to create. The humiliation of seeing Jake's transformation paralleled her own decline. While Jake grew more confident and successful, Emily's life continued to unravel. She had lost clients, respect, and social standing after the scandal. Her finances were strained, and the once polished image she had clung to now felt like a facade that everyone could see through. Every time she saw a new post about Jake, it stung like salt in a wound. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that his changes were only possible because of her criticisms and the pressure she had put on him. But she knew how that would sound: bitter, desperate, pathetic. And deep down, she suspected Jake wouldn't care. He had moved on, leaving her behind to stew in her own anger and regret. At a chance encounter at the grocery store, the reality of their new dynamic hit Emily with full force. She spotted Jake in the produce section, his basket filled with fresh vegetables, a sight that would have been laughable a year ago. He was with Laura, who was chatting animatedly about a recipe, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They looked relaxed, happy, completely in sync. Jake noticed Emily before she could duck away. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Emily saw something in his gaze she hadn't seen in years: confidence, independence, and a total lack of the hesitation that used to define him. He gave her a polite nod, nothing more, before returning his attention to Laura. The interaction left Emily shaken. For years, she had seen Jake as an extension of herself, someone she could shape and control. But the man in front of her now was entirely his own person, and that realization was as infuriating as it was painful. She had wanted him to improve, but she had also wanted him to need her, and now he didn't. In the quiet of her empty house, Emily was left to reckon with the choices that had led her here. Jake's transformation wasn't just a testament to his resilience, it was a reminder of her own failure. She had spent so long focusing on his flaws that she had ignored her own. And now, as Jake moved forward, Emily remained stuck, haunted by the life they could have had if only she had found a better way to love him.